people do not want their narrative. And in fact, they spend their time waging attacks against us. One of the fundamental points in this combat, because this is a combat that we are waging, it's that there's panic in Brussels following the annulment of elections in Romania, because we reached even new levels. And this has been instrumentalized to contest these elections, and the Commission is interfering in the organization of national elections on the basis of the DSA. Should these NGOs receive EU funds? This is a subject of utmost importance to understand what is happening, what is underpinning this. Codes of conduct, certain kinds of NGOs. Mr. Lewis, you stated it is a minister of controlling public opinion and the narrative, and we will go even further. These NGOs, you very clearly put this forth in clear terms, the implementation of an environment by the Commission that is giving funds to some NGOs to promote some types of discourse, and the DSA is the tool that is a tool of censorship for any criticism of this. It's important because what is the conclusion? We have a propaganda machine. It has an objective. It is noting that it has not been able to achieve what it wants to do, so it uses this ecosystem of NGOs that are favorable to this narrative. And indeed, they're not always NGOs. We saw with Catergate, for example, where Fight for Impunity, these were bogus NGOs used by some socialist members of the European Parliament. So there were these millions of euros that have been earmarked for these bogus projects that are called scientific research. This is a scandal. Horizon funds for the promotion of research and innovation that are used in the end to promote a discourse of the EU to push individuals to believe that there is just one way of thinking. Now, you stated this, flagged it up very clearly. These funds that are also used they could be used to fight cancer, and you state that very clearly in your report. These funds rather are being used for consortia, think tanks. Just take a look. What's great is when you're an MEP, you have access to reports, and that is useful for us to have these types of exchanges with you because you go even more in depth in your research than we are able to do. And I discovered in this research that there's an observatory here. You mention here in your report, this observatory, the power of narratives. We finance this gadget, €1 million, 3.3 in the end, 3.3 million were earmarked for these think tanks that are completely opaque. A couple of reports, it's self-promotion, and it's interesting really what you can see in your report. They come up with some narratives with keywords. So if you say bureaucracy in your speech, or villains, then we are flagged up as red with AI, and then we are banned immediately. So the report, in terms of the form, it's the EU that is financing 1.2 million to come up with a specific vision of the EU. The fact that we criticize this bureaucracy then sidelines us, and there's no control over these individuals because we don't know how much they're paid. There's no transparency in terms of how these funds are used. In fact, you should go even further in your research, and you have done that, sir, in the Budgetary Control Committee. We saw, and it's extremely important to point this out, in the Budgetary Control Committee, when we have access to a contract, we only have a limited amount of access to that contract. And in fact, we can't photocopy those contracts, and I can't even speak to it outside of the meeting. That's one of the issues of this committee, or this commission, and this EU that wants to control everything and keep everyone in the dark. It's also important to keep in mind the speech that von der Leyen delivered in Davos just a couple of years back. The priorities for the upcoming years, well, here we are, fighting misinformation. Now, why did I want to recall this speech? Because it is key in the establishment of this ecosystem to promote a narrative and to fight against people like us who are free speakers and who are free enough to criticize the EU. And that is why they have the DSA. DSA that is being used by some members of the European Parliament to encourage the Commission to control, to monitor, and in fact, with Commissioner Virkkunen, they understood that freedom of speech is a value of the EU. Now, some people have forgotten that. I think there are socialist members of this Parliament that want to close TikTok, want to close down X because there's not enough control, there's too much free speech out there. That bothers them, and they're losing elections, so that bothers them all the more. So they want to close everything down. So it's interesting to see this commission, as you showed in your report, has put into place this environment to promote their narrative. We've seen it doesn't work. They've tried to do it for 30 years now via the press. They're trying to do it again now in the digital sphere. Still not working because our young people, they don't watch TV like we did. They're on Snapchat, they're on TikTok. And it's true, as politicians, we use this social media. Why? Because many mainstream media outlets do not give us an outlet. And in fact, sometimes they don't even invite us to their shows or debates. And so that is what freedom of speech is in the EU, something that is completely defended by many journalists. So in the digital sphere today, they say that they're liberal, and this is being promoted by these liberal thinkers to limit us to have access to this freedom of speech. So they're calling this tool now the Digital Services Act. It is becoming a Digital Surveillance Act. The Digital Services Act was negotiated in the Internal Market Committee. It wasn't negotiated in the Libe Committee or in the Cult Committee, the Culture Committee, where we deal with the press. It was negotiated in the Internal Market Committee. Why? Because the idea was that it was to regulate the internal market vis-a-vis third countries that were invading illegal markets, counterfeit, and to limit our market as well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But throughout the course of the crafting of this document, there was a shift. It was Musk bought Twitter, which was a problem for Commissioner Breton. And what we saw was that over the course of time, there were amendments to recraft the text to limit freedom of expression, specifically with those who could flag things up because of their for the purposes of the trustworthiness. And you point this out in your report as well. There are national authorities here, for example, in France. They can decide who can flag up something to the Commission if there's a problem with something that you have published on social media. Here's an example. In France, there was an individual who flagged something up. They were given the title as someone who's a fact-checker from the CGT trade union. The CGT trade union has become a fact-checker. It's a communist trade union, and in fact, they spend their time waging attacks against us. So I think that says it all. You have an environment with NGOs that are financed, and you said that 649 million, tip of the iceberg. You have to really dig in to see what's underpinning all of that. There are fake NGOs. Another example, a fake NGO where they tell you that you should use taxpayer money properly, Oxfam. I think in Belgium also you have Oxfam. It's there to fight poverty around the world. Wonderful. It's a good, it's between around 150,000. Well, that's what they have in terms of profit. But the idea of an NGO is that they should be a non-profit. Another definition for the Commission for allocating funds to these NGOs is that they don't have any commercial activities, yet Oxfam sells products. Excellent. But it doesn't mean that they don't get money from the Commission. Another point in the definition for NGOs, because the Commission tried to define what an NGO is that they should not be partisan or politically slanted. But if you look at Oxfam and its history, the previous spokesperson was Manon Aubry. What a coincidence. And in France, the one that is running Oxfam France is Cécile Duflot, who is a member of the Green Party. So I think they should stop taking the piss out of us and be honest. What's interesting about the Court of Auditors report is that in all of these NGOs, there's 1/3 of all of these NGOs that get the majority of EU funds. And we made a request to have a list of these NGOs because it is our money, it is your money. And the Court of Auditors did not want to reply to our query on this, nor did the Commission. So this lack of transparency persists. It's a problem for us in the Budgetary Control Committee because our role as members of the Parliament is to control the budget. And there are, in fact, tools to try to fight this position. We raise it with the ombudsman. For the time being, the ombudsman hasn't been very active. We'll have to try to shake her up a bit. We also raise this with the European Public Prosecutor's Office. We know that was raised with Pfizer, for example, but not much progress is made. And so we try to raise these issues to see what we can share, what we're learning from the inside, cross-check all of the information and publish that, because that is our objective, to publish everything that we know. Frequently, what we see is that knowing is good, but sharing that knowledge is even better. And that's the point of all of these reports, to really try to look at the NGOs, cross-check it with the DSA, and to come to a conclusion. And I'd like to conclude on that point. The entire system that you see, the reports, it's wonderful that Jacob is flagging up this future report that will be published on the media. I think it's also important to really link that up to this entire ecosystem that we're talking about, because what we can see in the Culture Committee, there's a working group, and I'd like to thank all of the members of the European Parliament that are here, that are currently working on that subject. What we see, indeed, in the Culture Committee, there's a working group on media, because, indeed, they want to educate people on how to read information. This isn't coming from me. It's written in black and white. It's in this working document right here. And as I said, I'm in the Budgetary Control Committee, and I was able to follow up on the DSA, and I was also a part of the Democracy Shield Committee. Now, why do I raise these three committees, ITRE, Kant, and the Democracy Shield? Well, the conclusion is that this special committee on the Democracy Shield, as we showed here, is that there is an ecosystem of NGOs that are there to propagate the narrative of the European Commission. You have the DSA that is there to control everything that we say and to level censorship. And I would love to spend more time on the censorship of individuals, but also censorship of elections. We saw that with the elections in Romania. They used TikTok to annul elections, lest we forget. That has been the biggest scandal of the last 30 years. We used a social media platform to annul elections. And the conclusion of all of this is that since they are losing the game, they are in complete crisis. And when Madame von der Leyen said 2 years back that her priority and the biggest danger wasn't climate change, it's democracy, it's because they've understood something. It's that the people do not want their narrative. Every single election, we see an uptick in sovereignist parties that show that people do not want their narrative. So they want to fight against us, and they're using every tool they have in hand. And in fact, for example, Marine Le Pen is not going to be able to run for the presidency. So all tools seem to be a fair game. And that's what I wanted to communicate via this presentation, is that the Commission, when they talk about propaganda, controlling information, censorship, and now there's a so-called independent committee set up by the Democracy Shield. So there's going to be new powers for the Commission to control the press and to control political parties and future elections. So I'd like to conclude on that point. and just state that nothing's a coincidence here. For 30 years now, it's all been out there. With DSA, what we've seen is that there's been an uptick in the will to control what we can say, and because they're losing power, they're in crisis, and they want to set up this independent authority that will not be independent by any means. Thank you.